I'm back. I hope you're ready to explore a little bit more about the child choice with me. If you don't know, this channel is discussing the topic of whether or not to start families through procreation, through birthing children. This is a choice that adults face when they come of age, and I happen to find myself in this group, so it is of particular interest to me and people like me to decide whether or not to have children as opposed to other means like adoption. And I always want you to keep that option in mind. But today, I've been finding a problem when I want to talk to people about this. I find it really hard to find people who have an opinion who have actually read about antinatalism. So when I talk to them about an antinatalist idea, or when I criticize a pronatalist idea, I find they haven't read a writer like David Benatar, and so they bring a lot of straw men to the debate. So I will hear things like, the antinatalist position is pro-extinction, right? I hear this a lot. Antinatalist position being like a death cult. It's about, oh, if you wanted to, you could just end it. Why are you gonna tell people to not have kids when you could just, if you're not enjoying yourself here? A lot of like straw men like that. I love life. I'm really having a great time on planet Earth, with the exception of some of the difficulties that we all face, coming to terms with my own death and things like that. So it's not all sunshine and rainbows. In fact, there's a lot of darkness in all of our lives that is undeniable. But on the whole, I have a pretty good life. You can be an antinatalist and love life. That's the niche I'm hoping to fill with this channel, because I look around at some of my company, the people who are giving antinatalist ideas, and I suppose they mean well, but a lot of them, they have a very doom and gloom view of the world. And for me, it's more of an ethical decision which involves not exposing others to risk and not endangering others' lives. And also, it's a positive view of being unborn. I have a positive opinion, I suppose you could say, of not being born. I think it's a pretty nice state of being for someone, because there is no anxiety, there is no suffering. It's a lot like death, in fact. People who have died, I think they're in a good place. They're not in heaven, I'm an atheist, but I think it's a good place because they have no desires and therefore they have no deprivation. There's no risk of going hungry. There's no fear of consequences for anything. There's nothing outside of their control. They have no body, they have no mind to be fucked with. That's more where I'm coming from. But anyway, let's continue with the straw man. Okay, another straw man is that we want to outlaw families. We want to stigmatize mothers with children. We hate kids. We want to stigmatize kids. We look down on families and children. This is all nonsense. This is why this video is important, because beyond this video we can actually have a productive conversation around the ethics of procreation. But until then, these are just mischaracterizations, and it makes it very difficult to actually proceed forwards in a good, productive way. Now, but why is it that they are mischaracterizing this? Why is it that they confuse us with ethilists, for example? Ethilism is a kind of ideology which is that if there were a means to snuff out all life on Earth instantly and cut short everyone's plans and desires and ambitions, that an ethilist would push that button. They would do that. They would detonate the nukes. Completely different ideology. I want to separate antinatalist idea from voluntary extinction. This is what this video is about. Understanding what is and is not antinatalism and the antinatalist opinion, because we can't get much further without this. Why is it that antinatalism is strawmanned so much? First of all, because people haven't read the book, but also it's easier to perceive antinatalism as an existential threat, treat this as a boogeyman, as a moral panic around the idea that maybe people shouldn't have kids morally, than to actually engage sincerely with the ideas, to calling it a death cult, saying that the next step is they're going to threaten people's reproductive rights, planning the demise of all sentient life on Earth, and they want to bring that about very quickly. I'm going to do a whole video, I think, on extinction. Some of the things you wouldn't have thought of when it comes to extinction, but I'll save that for a later video. As you can see, I've got this table here, a table which will help us to set apart categories that are obviously different and should be treated differently, okay? So the right to, let me outline this. So this is the right to exist, continue existing, but on the end here I've also added the right to reproduce, because there are some straw men that involve that say that antinatalists want to restrict people's bodies in the same way that a pro-life group, which is an extremist group, the pro-life group is extremists. An idea can be extreme even if it's popular. Our main contention here is between these two: continued existence versus starting a brand new existence. First of all, let's just put this in different words, right? Because I'm working with Benatar ideas here. You know, I've just been reading in his book. He establishes a lot of the antinatalist position, which is called Better Never to Have Been, okay? It's not a very joyful read, but it is pretty grounded. Another wording that he uses is a life worth starting. And here he would call it a life worth saving. A life worth saving. You can imagine many examples of this. Someone in a hospital who needs medical treatment. Some people believe that criminals, certain violent criminals, should not have a right to continue existing. Not my opinion, but that's a pretty common opinion. Violent criminals lose their right to continued existence. It's fair enough, you know, I'm just bringing it into the realm of the Overton window, things that people actually believe and are not ashamed to believe, okay? Now, we don't really have a life worth, what would I put here? For reproductive rights, you know, a life worth for the mothers, really. That sentence doesn't work, but it's about freedom. Because we often see freedom, the freedom to do as we want, to be used as an excuse to interfere with the lives of others, you know, to inflict things onto others. An example of this is within the vegan paradigm. We see that non-vegans will claim that they have the freedom to enslave animals for their bodies, for their animal products. I'm just going to change the ISO on this. So we see freedom used very often as a justification for interfering in the lives of others. And I always want to put a question mark on that. Do you have the freedom to endanger someone by bringing a new life into a dangerous world where they could be born with a chronic illness that is intensely painful, that is uncomfortable? They could live their lives immediately in discomfort, or they could be born with some form of autism, for example. That would mean they would grow up to be kind of like a child in an adult's body. If that were the case, there is a probability that would happen from childbirth. They would be born into a world that is not created for them. It's not suitable for them, you know. They would really struggle to find their place, you know, a place where they belong, where they are cared for in this kind of world. Rich or poor, it doesn't really matter. If you're born with type of severe autism, these people are born in a kind of perpetual fear because of the way they're born, and it's not a very nice way to live. And the thing is, if you say that you have the right to reproduce and to expose a new person to that risk, just as an example, but there are many other ways. If you give birth to a male, in years to come there could be a war and that male could be drafted and they could experience PTSD, having to shoot someone to pieces or blow someone up, right? And they'd be drafted for that if they're a male. If they're a female, they're exposed to the risk of being sexually assaulted. They have a large likelihood of being sexually assaulted at some point within their lives. What gives you the freedom to endanger someone like that? By choosing to bring them in to the world when you didn't have to, because we have contraception and we know how to use a condom. This is a complex one. I will get into what the antinatalist position is on this, but just know that for the time being, it's not about restricting someone's freedom through law. It turns out that a lot of women don't actually want to be mothers, but they're pressured into it by society, they're pressured into it by their families. And what we want to do is we want to have a positive approach. I would want to encourage anyone who doesn't feel like having a baby pop out of them, which looks like a pretty traumatic experience as it is. I would encourage them. I would give them everything they need, all of the social approval they need to say, right on, don't give birth if you don't want to give birth. Okay, so it's more about encouragement, this kind of soft approach. Do you see already how antinatalism is not as scary as pronatalists make it out to be? Parent rights, I suppose you could call it. So let's break this table down when it comes to deprivation. Now, this is really central to the question of whether or not it's ethical to bring new life into the world, okay? Now, do the unborn, people who are not people, they don't exist yet, do they have a right to exist? Do they have a right to be brought into existence? Is it mandatory, obligatory to bring in as many lives as possible? And on the flip side, is it a moral crime to have less kids than your maximum possible amount of kids? No. And one of the reasons is because an unborn, like a fully unborn, they're not a fetus, they're not a baby, they're not a fetus, okay? They don't exist. They cannot experience deprivation. They don't want anything. They don't want to exist. They don't want to live. They don't want anything. That's you. You might be projecting those desires onto them, but really that's a selfish reason. If you want them to exist, that's a selfish reason. I'm sorry. I know you don't want to think that if you're a parent or if you want to be a parent, but that is the truth. I'm here to be truthful, right? And I know that's going to upset people. The unborn can't have a right to exist. They would be, at the very least, be punished in some kind of way, perhaps socially, for just not wanting to carry around a baby for months on end and then to have them go through a very small canal and then to take care of them for 18 years. Some people don't want to do that, and they should have a right to not do that. Someone who is not born cannot be deprived of anything because they don't exist. They literally don't exist. Okay? Now, I understand this means if you're someone who believes in reincarnation, you believe in like souls and things like that, you're going to have trouble with this, because I'm sorry to say, you believe in magic. You don't believe in science, if that's you, and that's a problem that you have to work through. You have to deal with that, okay, before you can come to the table and engage in reality, matters that involve reality. The right to continue existing. Now, in almost all cases, apart from like voluntary cases when people want to stop, I mean, it's about choice, isn't it? You should be allowed to stop existing if you want, but you have a right, if you want to keep existing, within reason, if it doesn't hurt others, you should be allowed and helped to continue existing. I mean, I think we can all be on the same page about that. And antinatalists are the same, okay? Antinatalists say that if you are existing right now, when you are brought into existence and when you go through life, as you go through life, you acquire desires. You develop things you want to continue living for. You might want to achieve things as personal achievements. You find things and routines and things you want to do, okay? These are all things that could be deprived. If you're at any point in your life, you've developed a desire, even just being born. There is a biological impulse for self-preservation and to keep going. Sometimes it's unfortunate, really, because it means that they stay in situations where they are miserable for longer than they have to. But even people who are terminally ill, who are going through great amounts of pain, they'll often choose to stay alive for one more day and one more day and one more day, despite the pain. And a lot of that is biological. There's an instinct for self-preservation. The right to continue existing is an absolute yes for antinatalists. Now, the right to reproduce, I'm going to put here, I'm going to put an asterisk. I didn't put a cross. I'm just teasing you guys here. I put an asterisk, okay? And we're going to talk about this. Antinatalists are not interested in forcibly restricting someone's rights to their own body. Just not interested. Not interested. The only thing that antinatalists are interested in talking, like verbally changing paradigms to encourage, and perhaps a little bit of discouragement sometimes, but really to encourage people who are thinking about the well-being of the unborn. If they're considering that, we want to bring this conversation up. We want to talk about the ethical implications for new lives that are being forced into existence. No matter what anyone tells you who hasn't actually read David Benatar, who hasn't actually familiarized themselves with the antinatalist position, right? No matter what anyone tells you, antinatalism is concerned with the well-being of people, okay? With the well-being of people. And it's not going to be a good time if people are forced into a Handmaid's Tale situation, or the inverse of a Handmaid's Tale situation where they are restricted from starting families. It has to kind of be at the person's own will to do this. You know, it's not good to force someone against their will to not have families. And antinatalists are not interested in that, even though it's characterized as that by people, all right? Because that wouldn't be good for well-being. We want to go about this change in the paradigm in a way that is responsible. And we actually believe that we have reached a point in humanity where we can question our natural impulses, okay? And actually, a lot of you actually think this already. You think this way when it comes to rape, okay? There are men who have this sexual impulse to have sex with a woman whether or not they are consenting. They would say that adult male has the choice whether or not to listen to their biological programming, okay? They could think their way out of committing that moral crime, okay? So we already believe this. We already believe that we are the masters of ourselves, that we are not slaves to our biology, and we can actually question it morally and think. The thing is, not everything that is natural is necessarily moral, okay? Nature is cruel. Nature is often immoral. What we're saying here is that we are encouraging people to be the masters of themselves and not to their bodies and not to their biology. The right to exist, the right to continue existing, and the right to reproduce. The next one here we've got is consent, okay? It's a very useful ethical tool. Generally, this is where we create the line between what's moral and immoral in many regards, okay? And it's where we should. If we're not doing that, it's where we should. Creates a great boundary, okay? Now, it's interesting to apply this to the right to exist, the right to continue existing, and the right to reproduce. Can the unborn give their consent to being born? Again, it's a no. The unborn, and like it or not, you have to admit, the unborn, like future children who have not been conceived and created yet, they didn't have a say in it. It's all the parents' decision. And the parents make this decision knowing, and I will make this argument, they make the decision knowing that their children are going to go through some shit. They're going to go through some shit. Nobody makes it out of this life alive. Nobody makes it out without some scrapes and bruises, some nasty scrapes and bruises, some traumatizing scrapes and bruises. It's a traumatizing experience being alive. Sometimes it's tedious and annoying. Sometimes it's damn right painful. A lot of the time it's scary, very, very scary. There are huge risks of fate worse than death that are lurking right around the corner. They might happen in our lifetimes, depending on the way that decision makers act in years to come. So the unborn do not consent to being born. Now, the continued existence, people who are here, right? That's what it is. It's people who are existing, right? They do consent, okay? And they do consent because in many cases they have the means to exit if they want to, and that should be a choice for them. Sometimes they don't. And in fact, throughout history, they were lied to that they would be damned to hell if they did take their own lives, if they did self-exit, right? And that meant that a lot of people were kept in horrible, horrible situations through this lie, this religious lie. But yes, nowadays you do. I would like to see the means for assisted dying to be improved in many countries, because it's really a big taboo. It remains a big taboo to this day, and that's a shame, because a lot of people are just not having a good time, and they find themselves with very limited options, and often those options are very violent options to take a way out, and very scary. This is a big topic in itself that one day I'd like to cover. But in general, there are means. They're not always pleasant means, but there are means to exit if you want. Consenting to reproduce. I should hope that all of this is done consensually. There are, of course, criminal cases where people are impregnated not through consent, with animals, for example, on farms. Cows and pigs, turkeys, all of these animals, they are forcibly impregnated. They are forced to become pregnant so that they give birth to more creatures. But in human terms, consent is seen as a very important thing to stick by when it comes to procreation. It's just weird that it's not seen as important when it comes to life. So no one will face a social backlash for giving birth or procreating a child, even in really dire circumstances. You do start to see it creeping in with consensus opinion. Like, people will start to say at a certain point, well, that family can't afford a 10th child. Why are they doing that? They can't support that child. That child's not going to end up having a good life. Why didn't they use contraception? You start to see that creep in when the situation gets really dire. An antinatalist would say the ideal number of births is 0, because every birth is a harm to the individual that's being birthed without their consent. Okay, lastly, I've got this well-being idea, right? Really, antinatalism does kind of stem out of utilitarianism. I'm not a utilitarian myself, but I do see the applications for utilitarianism in certain discussions. I think I like the word well-being, because it kind of encompasses what we care about in our lives, our values, right? Restricting someone's freedom is also restricting their well-being in many cases. Hurting someone physically or invading their space, that's a threat to someone's well-being. So well-being is a nice one. And I think that antinatalists are primarily concerned with well-being. Now, in order to increase well-being, antinatalists believe in the reduction of harm as a very high priority, to reduce harms. And I see where they're coming from. Sometimes people think that's quite a myopic view, because they're happy for the harms in their own lives. They see it as, all in all, the harms were worth it, or the harms were good. But an antinatalist would argue that we can say that about our own lives, but we can't make that decision for the lives of people who don't exist yet. We can't bring them into a world that's going to harm them and then say that, don't worry, on the whole, your harm will be worth it. Your harm will be okay. That is, for one thing, it's breaching consent. Okay. So what antinatalists would say is that we should minimize the number responsibly, not forcing anything, but we should encourage people to minimize the number of children they bring into the world. If everyone had less kids, there would be less harm, which kind of improves overall well-being. Many people actually, they are pro-natalist while also thinking that there are all these problems in the world, and believing that these problems, which do exist, are caused by overpopulation. So there are many pronatalists who live with this contradiction. They can see that overpopulation is causing all of these problems, but they're unwilling to do anything about it. They're unwilling to change their opinions on bringing new people into the world. It's a very strange contradiction that they live with. Now, an antinatalist, when it comes to the well-being of people who are existing, they're just like anyone else. They would say, we should help them. We should help them. And in fact, a childless person is better equipped to help the people who are already existing, because they're not driving their kids to football practice every weekend. They're not having to do parent-teacher meetings. They're not having to do all these myriad of tasks that parents are tasked with for 18 years after they choose to procreate a child. They're child free, which means they are freed up, they are more free to actually help the people who are already here. Okay, so not only are antinatalists of the opinion that we should actively help the people who are here and be kind to them and be nice to them, but they also are better equipped to actually do that in many cases. Childless people are better equipped to do that. Lots of people disagree with me there. They say that parents of families vote more responsibly because they have a vested interest in the future of the country, because they have children who are going to live and experience that. Why does it matter that you have a biological child for you to care about the future of your country and for the future of a community of people? I call bullshit on that. I think all these people who are saying, Elon Musk, who's saying that parents should have double voting rights, they should have double the vote of a childless couple, fuck him. For someone who's supposed to be smart, he is such a fucking idiot. It's unbelievable. Anyway, let's not digress into that guy. Now, so when it comes to people who have the potential of being parents, for the well-being, we meet at this compromise. We understand, antinatalists understand that to enforce any kind of rule that would stop people from having control over their own bodies, that in itself would cause turmoil. That would not be good for people's well-being, right? So they don't. So what antinatalists do, is they encourage people. They just encourage them in a way where if someone decides to not have a child, that will be of their own free will. And they just make it so the potential parent is more likely to not want to procreate. It's a very easy option. It doesn't infringe on anyone's rights. It's practicing your freedom of speech, your freedom of expression and discourse. And it helps us to also explore other moral territories such as veganism. I'm often bringing up veganism in here because there are many parallels. And it's about encouraging people, and it's also about breaking down social stigmas around people who choose to be childless, right? So is it making the world better for people who make the choice to be childless by normalizing it in a way and saying that it's okay? It's better than okay. It's actually very responsible. You're not exposing anyone to any unnecessary risk, and you're helping to bring down the population over time, which is actually more likely to actually improve people's well-being long term. A lot of people say that by being antinatalist, you are bringing about the extinction of the human race, the early extinction of the human race. Benatar makes a good point. He says there is actually no correlation between the population of humans and the speed at which they'll become extinct. It could in fact be the inverse. The number of people, when we're talking about, we've got 8 billion people on the planet, that's a huge amount of people, right? If that population were to taper off, slowly descend, and you compare that to a population that just continues to exponentially grow, it's not clear which of those planets is going to go extinct faster, okay? Think about that, put that in your pipe and smoke it, because I think that's a really important point, that sever this connection, this mental connection you might have between antinatalism and this pro-extinction, voluntary extinction bullshit. It's not about extinction. You should not have to worry about extinction. Also, one last point about extinction. Are you assuming that without antinatalism that the human race will never go extinct? Because extinction is a thing that's going to happen with heat death at some point. And we either make it to heat death or we don't. It's a bit like your own existential belief in yourself. Everyone's dying. Everyone's going to die. The human race will become extinct at some point in the very distant future, hopefully. You need to come to terms with that, because that's inevitable. That's going to happen. The human race will become extinct at some point in the distant future. It could be that a smaller population of humans outlives by a long, by multitudes of the large population. We don't know. You gotta think about this idea of extinction more before you bring it to the table in an antinatalist discussion, because right now it doesn't really have a place here. It doesn't make sense. The arguments don't fit. They don't work. And it's annoying to have to keep hearing this conflation between antinatalism and extinction, Okay, I want to talk a little bit more about the reproductive rights, okay? Now, as I've said, antinatalists would ideally have 0 births because every birth is considered a harm. And I'm talking mainly here, when I'm talking about antinatalists, I'm mainly talking about David Benatar, right? Because he is that central pillar of the antinatalist position, okay? The ideal number for Benatar is 0. But why is this? Because he's trying to reduce harm. And he also recognizes that it's about well-being. If you were to just force this number of 0, like that would be terrible. It would be horrible. Everyone's quality of life would abruptly go down. It would be horrible for everyone. You'd have to bring about some kind of totalitarian state. Wouldn't be good. So we shouldn't do it. And we can't do it anyway, but even if we could do it, we shouldn't. Okay? It comes down to being responsible and principled and trying to behave in this world in a way that is looking out for the people who are already here. And also that could include looking out for the people in the future, including people that could potentially be born but don't have to be born into this mess that is the human experience. Now, typically with reproductive rights, when you have this typical mainstream conversation, you're either pro-life or you're pro-choice. Pro-life means that if you happen to get pregnant, the state or the church or both should force you to continue that pregnancy all the way to being born. And the typical conservative thing is like, once that baby is born, that baby could just like fuck off. Like that baby is not entitled to any kind of healthcare, is not entitled to any benefits or any kind of care at all, right? But the fetus, oh, the fetus is so important. The fetus is far more important than the people that are already here. I could go on and on about the pro-life thing. Now, the other option is pro-choice, where you believe that the state or the church should have no business in what a woman decides to do with their body. And this is where antinatalists are. You might find that as a contradiction, but no, it's not, because you can choose to not procreate. If you had unprotected sex, you had a whoopsie, you're now pregnant, an antinatalist could say that that's too late. That's too late, because now you have initiated the life process. Benatar is actually in a third category. Benatar is pro-death. Ooh, spicy. Benatar is pro-death, meaning up until quite a late stage, Benatar would say that it's preferable to abort, not because of the choice of the mother, but because of the right to remain unborn, the right to not be born into a world of dangers and of risks. Certain harm is what Benatar would say. I'm more to do with the risks. I fuck with the risks. But still, I think he makes a good point that being born is always a harm because it sets in motion all of these stages of life where you will be harmed, including the ultimate death. You have a right to continue existing because people who exist here, they immediately start having this intention to keep living and to live their life to the fullest now that they're here. That's very much me and that's very much you, I'm sure, that you want to stay here and you want to play the game. You want to decide as reasonably as possible the time of when you can die. You don't want that to be decided for you. Anyone who starts ping-ponging around here in a discussion is going to really annoy me, okay? If you're debating me on the ethics of procreation, that's fine. I enjoy a debate and I welcome it, but it's going to annoy me if you're conflating people who are already here with people who are potentially future people. And there has to be a line here. There has to be a division. This is just an extra bonus one on the end because a lot of people have questions about reproductive rights, okay? That's the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed this lecture. Goodbye.